The mystery of Pierre Kassen's disappearance still haunts scientists, journalists, and ordinary people. How did a man who discovered the formula for accelerated consciousness growth become the most talked-about mystery of the century overnight? Our investigation contains only verified facts, rare evidence, expert analysis, and debunking of myths. We will follow in Kassen's footsteps to understand where the line between scientific achievement and personal tragedy lies, and whether there is any chance of getting to the truth in a case that shook the entire world. See Pierre Kassen's courageous journey to one of the greatest scientific sensations of the 21st century began quite mundane, with dry laboratory experiments at the intersection of biochemistry and neuroscience. His name only truly entered world history after the publication of a work that became unofficially known as the Formula for Accelerated Consciousness. This term did not appear in any specialized encyclopedia or in the reports of leading academic institutions. However, it is precisely such discoveries that forever change our understanding of intelligence, the limits of thought, and the possibilities of human self-development. The essence of his theoretical construct was complex. The formula assumed that through a certain combination of biological stimuli, intellectual activity, and optimized external influences, it was possible to accelerate the formation of new neural connections by orders of magnitude, and thus literally grow consciousness in a matter of weeks, where it normally takes years. The idea sparked heated debate. Some admired the courage to question the laws of traditional pedagogical models, while others saw the research as a serious threat to mental health and social norms. Before the publication, Kassen's reputation was typically European. He was respected for his consistency, meticulousness, and ability to build teams of like-minded people. But the sensational news brought him out of the shadows of narrow circles and into the spotlight. Scientists were interested in the details, the public was interested in the broadest prospects, and some governments were interested in the potential. Strategic advantages. Entire fields emerged within related disciplines. Methods of accelerated learning, the impact of indirect stimuli on the clinical picture of cognitive disorders, and work with internal and external motivational factors. Kassen's discovery quickly became a theoretical sensation, instantly sparking industry discussions in France, the UK, Germany, Japan, and the US. Centers conducting research at the intersection of neurobiology and artificial intelligence showed particular interest, as the formula made it possible to model not only human, but also conditionally artificial cognitive systems. Conferences began to discuss whether modern computing tools could completely replicate the effect, and whether the discovery could be useful for restoring impaired brain functions, for example, in aging or after trauma. The business world reacted just as enthusiastically. Corporations creating educational platforms and specialized medical products for rehabilitation rushed to announce attempts to incorporate individual fragments of the formula into their solutions. Of course, most of these implementations did not have a proven clinical effect, but the very fact that investment funds were interested in them fueled interest in the topic. Almost immediately, Kassen was surrounded by an aura of a highly unusual researcher, ready to argue with the masters, take risks, and insist on publishing interim results. Contrary to the fears of premature publication shared by his more cautious colleagues. After his first publication, he repeatedly explained in the relevant media that the aim of his work was not revolution for revolution's sake, but a well-founded step forward that could be verified and reproduced in independent laboratories. However, It was this discovery that became a turning point in the scientist's biography, leading not only to a new wave of public appearances and invitations, but also to the beginning of a completely different, dark phase of his life, which few could have guessed at the height of his career. It was the success of the accelerated consciousness growth formula that triggered a series of complex events that forever changed not only his fate, but also the very direction of the debate about the future of neuroscience. Nothing in Pierre Kassen's life predestined him for world recognition. He was born in the south of France into an intellectual family. His father, a history teacher, and his mother, a librarian, surrounded the future scientist with an atmosphere of trust in knowledge from an early age. His parents' home, full of books, complex conversations, and respect for any manifestation of curiosity, determined the main principle of his nature: to ask questions without fear of appearing naive or unreasonable. Kassen's childhood was spent among ancient alleys and small shops, where he browsed antique books and collectible manuscripts. His childhood friends' memories are filled with episodes about his extraordinary fascination with collections of riddles, puzzle books, and biographies of great explorers. At the age of 12, he became interested in how memory can change depending on the environment, and he began conducting his first experiments on himself and his schoolmates. In high school, he won all the district biology and chemistry competitions, which paved the way for him to attend one of the best high schools in the country. Here, the future scientist first encountered fundamental research methods, laboratory experiments, testing new educational technologies, and early experiments in cognitive development. Kassen was not only an experimenter, but also an observer, carefully recording all his results, keeping dozens of notebooks, and systematizing his materials into sections. His youth was spent during a period of rapid digitalization of society, which gave him early access to computer simulations and methods of modeling the brain. His first publications appeared while he was still at university. He studied the influence of different types of visual stimuli on the speed of information assimilation and showed that the organization of the environment influences the formation of new connections. Kassen's passion intersected with the interests of a small research team at one of the country's leading scientific institutes. Working with experienced biochemists and psychophysiologists not only gave him new knowledge, but also formed a circle of like-minded people who were ready for the unknown and not afraid of failure. Here he led his first independent project on the possibilities of accelerated learning in the adult brain. Moving to Paris marked the beginning of a new stage. By the end of his university studies, Kassen already had a series of minor scientific discoveries under his belt. He had identified a link between the speed of long-term memory formation and specific neurotransmitter activations. He was recognized as a gifted researcher with great promise in the fields of experimental pedagogy and neurophysiology. The international postgraduate program in which he was enrolled gave him access to the best laboratories in Europe and the United States. It was here that he first met his future colleagues, leading biochemists, AI specialists, and molecular engineers. Together, they analyzed the relationship between neural transmission speed, attention dynamics, and the characteristics of external motivation. The work carried out in these laboratories became the basis for future collaborations, many of which lasted for decades. Kassen developed a special attitude toward ethics and objectivity in research. He always insisted on publishing even negative or inconvenient data. He was noted as a person capable of working 20 hours a day without sacrificing attention to detail at the expense of the reliability of results. Colleagues often recalled how his unobtrusive humor helped relieve tension even in the most difficult work situations. And his support for younger colleagues helped foster a team spirit of trust and professional solidarity. By the age of 40, Pierre Kassen was already a recognized authority on brain plasticity and cognitive process modeling. His unifying role in major international projects, as well as his willingness to consider the opinions of colleagues from different scientific schools, allowed him to create a unique atmosphere of mutual trust, effective exchange, and rapid scientific breakthroughs. Friends noted his elusive combination of personal modesty and inner confidence. Despite his successes, he did not seek popularity, often refusing prestigious titles and preferring to quietly celebrate his team's achievements. His home life was extremely simple: a modest apartment, a bicycle, and annual trips to his parents' village. Kassen's personal life was surrounded by respect from his colleagues. He was extremely reluctant to talk about himself in interviews and always steered public discussions toward scientific dialogue. His close friends called him old-fashioned in the best sense of the word. A man of his word, dedicated to his work, who had not lost his sincere ability to be amazed by even the most ordinary facts if they revealed new meaning. By the time his work on accelerated consciousness growth was published, Kassen had all the hallmarks of a representative of the old school: integrity, balance, and no desire for quick fame or money. These qualities made him not only the ideal leader of ambitious scientific projects, but also an important figure in the formation of a new scientific school, ready to think critically and treat the legacy of their teacher with respect. Kassen's brilliant career and the universal respect for his method became the basis for the community's fundamental confidence. If such a discovery was made in his laboratory, then it deserved the most serious analysis, scrupulous re-examination, and, perhaps, truly opened a new page in the history of human intelligence. The emergence of Pierre Kassen's formula for accelerated consciousness growth was a turning point not only for his own destiny, but also for the agenda of modern science. Its foundation was formed at the intersection of neurobiology, biochemistry, and psychophysiology, disciplines that, at the time of Kassen's publication, were already armed with powerful experimental methods. The main boldness and uniqueness of the researcher's approach lay in his attempt to combine this diverse knowledge into a mathematical model designed to explain how external and internal stimuli can dramatically accelerate the processes of learning and memory formation. The key idea behind the formula was the synergy of three components: a strictly individual psycho-emotional attitude, the precise selection of neuromodulators, and an intellectual load chosen based on the basic parameters of the test subject. It is the combined effect of these influences, Kassen argued, that allows the brain to enter a state of enhanced plasticity, a unique mode in which the formation of new synaptic connections and the mastery of complex cognitive patterns occur at a rate many times faster than usual. Unlike many of his predecessors, Kassen constructed his model as a dynamic process described by a system of differential equations and adaptation algorithms. He compared each thought experiment or laboratory observation with real biochemical processes: the role of dopamine, serotonin, glutamate, and the peculiarities of feedback loop regulation in the cerebral cortex. This allowed them to go beyond theoretical reasoning. Kassen's formula became not just an abstract hypothesis, but a series of describable procedures that could be verified. Particular attention was paid to the multidisciplinary nature of the experiments. In one of its first reports, Kassen's team presented the results of testing on a group of volunteers. Short-term accelerated dynamics of information reproduction and analysis were recorded. although the effect disappeared sometime after the completion of the protocol. This sparked a series of debates about the long-term nature and reproducibility of the effects. The formula had a strict structure. The stages of initiation of the active environment were defined, as well as the phases of individualization of parameters for each test subject's tasks, and a set of safety and monitoring measures for the participant's condition. The reports recorded both successes and side effects, such as increased fatigue, episodes of short-term anxiety, and decreased motivation after the completion of the experiments. All these details became the subject of close analysis by the expert community. Opinions on the effectiveness of the formula were divided. Critics emphasized the insufficient depth of statistical data analysis, the possible influence of the placebo effect, and the threat of psychological imbalance if the technique was used too often. Supporters emphasized the transparency of Kassen's protocols. Unlike other similar works, the author insisted on publishing the full code of his computational models and providing independent access to raw data. The most heated debates arose around the question of the limits of the formula's applicability. Is it really possible to accelerate the development of consciousness in healthy adults? Or does the effect only work under certain, strictly laboratory conditions? Comparisons were made with other experiments in the field of neurostimulation, the emergence of new educational technologies, and historical attempts to radically accelerate the learning process. The scientific value of Kassen's work was recognized even by its most vocal opponents. Its publication sparked a broad discussion about the potential of the human brain, the possibilities and risks of individualized educational strategies, ethical limitations, and the need for further verification of the results on a large scale. It was at this stage that the scientific world and the public held their breath in anticipation of the next major publications and prepared for a major conference where Pierre Kassen was to present the full picture of his experiments for the first time. A few weeks before the conference, at which Pierre Kassen was going to present the complete model of his formula and the latest empirical data for the first time, his behavior became the subject of discussion among his closest associates. His assistants noted a change in his routine: sleepless nights, rare but tense meetings with colleagues, and a noticeable reduction in contact with the outside world. Previously open and cheerful, he became silent, preferring to take long walks alone in the dark alleys of the university campus, pensively gazing at the facades of the laboratories with which he associated the best years of his work. Colleagues invited to closed discussions recalled that Kassen would periodically stop mid-sentence, as if assessing the real risks of revealing his latest findings. He received letters offering him opportunities for collaboration, some from prestigious foreign institutions, others, on the contrary, from anonymous addresses hinting at the danger of possible information leaks. In those days, the professor spoke more and more about the importance of not only scientific, but also moral responsibility. How to determine the line between the search for truth and the possible damage caused by the emergence of such powerful technology in society? He stayed late in the university laboratory, taking home printed tables with results and equipment for control tests. His assistant recalled that on the evening before his disappearance, the professor sat at his computer for a long time, going through archives, sometimes returning to old notes, making notes in a notebook, which he immediately burned in a small desk ashtray. In his last days, he contacted several trusted colleagues via video link, discussing the plan for his report with unusual restraint. People who met him on his way home noted his troubled expression and, at times, his frightened glances around him. That same week, Kassen abandoned his usual minibus route, preferring to walk. On one occasion, an unusual attempt was made to change his class schedule, citing internal matters, a move that immediately attracted the attention of observant university staff. At that moment, the scientist's life was shrouded in mystery. Even at home, he began to close the curtains. Although he had previously enjoyed working in daylight, several witnesses claimed that unknown individuals rang his doorbell at night. He did not open the door, but after each ring, he peered out of the window, staring intently at the side streets. His cell phone often went unanswered, and unknown numbers appeared in his inbox with short messages. Stop. Beware of leaks. In the run-up to the conference, Kassen visited his favorite restaurant, where he usually discussed scientific news with colleagues only twice. On those evenings, the atmosphere at the table was heavy. The professor's answers were evasive, his jokes were dark, and his interest in the details of his colleagues' reports was unusually low. Kassen was clearly immersed in another internal dialogue, perhaps the agonizing reflection that always precedes a difficult step. The day before he disappeared, he canceled all his meetings and left a short message for his assistant asking her to reschedule the conference, if it was going to take place at all. That same evening, his office was sealed, his computer was turned off and disconnected from the network, and scraps of paper lay on his desk, in which experts later found nothing that could indicate any plans or alarming intentions. Everyone who knew Pierre Kassen at that stage, according to their recollections, felt a deep sense of unease, bordering on a premonition of impending doom. No one suspected that the next day would mark the beginning of one of the most mystical and mysterious stories in modern science. The morning of Pierre Kassen's disappearance was no different from many previous days. He left his home with a small bag. According to neighbors, it contained a bottle of water, a notebook, and a thermos of coffee. He was seen only once at the university, when he entered the laboratory without saying a word and immediately locked the door behind him. Throughout the day, laboratory staff tried several times to contact Kassen to finalize preparations for the conference, but their attempts were unsuccessful. Short messages appeared on the work messaging system. Be right there. Busy processing data. But none of them raised any alarm. The university's chief administrator later recalled that, according to the schedule, technical maintenance of the servers, including backup email databases and surveillance cameras, was to be carried out on that very day. Engineers noted some oddities. The access audit system was not working properly. Timestamps that were unusual for weekdays appeared in the logs, and some of the logs were empty. Around 7 p.m., commotion broke out at the university. Someone was unable to open Kassen's office. The door was locked from the inside, and no one answered the phone. Security guards were called, then the police. After the door was opened, the office was found empty. No winter clothes, no bag or personal items. His personal laptop was also missing, and there was only a piece of paper on the desk with the words, "The documents are in safe hands. I will return if I can." This note was later examined by linguists, but they found nothing unusual or alarming in its style. The search began that same night. University staff were joined by investigators, individual media representatives, and even several volunteers who decided to support the investigation. The first search of the area, cafeterias, recreational areas, and parks yielded no results. Kassen's trail ended near the side exit of the science building. Video cameras only captured his silhouette entering a dark corridor, after which everything was blurred in an abnormal white spot. Over the next 24 hours, no transactions were found on his credit cards. His phone remained silent, and his social media accounts remained inactive. the investigation was hampered by a lack of witnesses. No one could say with certainty that they had seen the professor after noon. His apartment was left in perfect order, but his personal belongings were also missing. The main mystery was the complete absence of any electronic traces. Kassen usually used double data backup, sending fragments of his projects to a secure cloud storage, but this time the server was empty. The archives had been deleted or redirected to an unknown location. The first 2 days of the search passed in a depressed, nervous atmosphere. Speculation flew in the media. Flight, a staged disappearance, external pressure or influence. Family and colleagues emphasized that the scientist had no personal debts or major unfinished projects, showed no signs of depression, and had no plans to change jobs or move. Thus began a series of days and nights when each new detail only added to the questions, leaving more and more gaps in the story. The investigation entered a new phase after a team of operatives entered Pierre Kassen's apartment with an official search warrant. Even a cursory inspection made it clear that the house had not been abandoned in a hurry, but with a carefully thought-out plan. All surfaces were spotless, and clothes, shoes, certificates, and personal souvenirs had disappeared. Only technical devices remained: a router, a couple of flash drives, and a backup power supply. But even these were free of any personal markings. No familiar labels or handwritten stickers. The CCTV system became a crucial element in the investigation. Modern compact cameras recorded all entrances and exits, as well as movement in the stairwell and surrounding area. When the data was first downloaded, it turned out that almost all of the recordings from the last 2 weeks had been rewritten retroactively. Only strangely short fragments remained. A few seconds of unrecorded video featuring technical staff and a couple of clips from a completely different period. For example, a sequence of days a month after the professor's disappearance. Technical expertise confirmed that such a cleanup requires not only access to physical devices, but also advanced digital archiving skills and knowledge of the internal structure of the system. It was established that the rewriting coincided with the date of Kassen's disappearance, but none of the external specialists recorded any visits to the apartment by third parties. The computer equipment left in the house was thoroughly cleaned with special software. The processors underwent a hardware reset, and the flash drives contained only standard drivers and test files. A fragment of an audio recording was found on one of the drives, just a few minutes of the scientist's personal reflections, which law enforcement officials deemed uninformative after transcription. During the search, no items were found that could be used to identify personal routes or preserve traces of everyday life. There was no food left in the refrigerator, and the dishes were perfectly washed and stacked in a drawer. All windows were tightly closed, and the door to the apartment showed no signs of forced entry. 2 things caught the investigators' attention. First, a hidden shelf in the closet, where, according to Kassen's friends, his draft notes were kept, was empty. Second, scraps of paper with illegible handwriting and faded lines of formulas were found in the ventilation shaft. Expert examination of these fragments revealed them to be copies of long-published theses, providing no answer to the mystery. Based on the results of the apartment search, investigators concluded that the disappearance was not so much obvious as carefully disguised. Everything looked as if a person had left on a long business trip, fully aware of the importance of not leaving behind even the slightest accidental clues. The first week after Pierre Kassen's disappearance was a real test for the investigative authorities and the university administration. The head of the criminalistics department, leading forensic computer scientists, and several independent digital security experts were brought in. Official statements were extremely brief. The police were investigating all possibilities, cooperating with the university, and conducting an internal audit of access to servers and backup storage. Almost immediately, the investigation ran into a serious lack of evidence. The campus visitor log showed the usual movements of employees, but there was nothing suspicious about the day Kassen disappeared. The investigative committee thoroughly checked everyone who worked or lived in nearby buildings. Not a single witness could clearly recall anything unusual, except for a feeling of anxiety that hung in the atmosphere of the laboratories. The key question is, how was it possible to leave not only the university, but also his private apartment so quickly and without a trace, while completely erasing all electronic activity? The possibility of voluntary departure was considered, but no direct evidence was found. There were no farewell letters, no attempts to cash out large sums of money, and no record of ticket purchases or car rentals. All of Kassen's transportation cards remained in his home or on the campus balance, and his last financial transactions were related to the purchase of office supplies. University staff assisted the police by providing access to all internal networks, but no concrete answers were found. Kassen did not download excessive amounts of data, send encrypted emails, or change his usual routes around campus in recent days. Leading digital security experts analyzed the lab's server logs, but all sessions were typical and no different from normal work. Regular reports for the press were released strictly on schedule. The lead investigator emphasized several times, "We have no evidence to suggest a violent disappearance or subsequent extortion." The public demanded more details, but the disclosure of even indirect information was restricted so as not to jeopardize the search. In fact, the phrase "scientific disappearance" appeared in the public domain for the first time. Journalists hyped up the mysterious disappearance of the scientist, putting additional pressure on the police. In the second week, an analysis of Kassen's possible connections with foreign scientific groups began. Requests were made to consular services, and border crossing lists were checked. The scientist's name did not appear anywhere. Experts in crisis psychology were brought in to rule out suicide or escape due to temporary mental or emotional distress, but personal documents and diaries showed complete awareness, consistency, and no signs of depression. Officials continued to repeat at every stage that the case remained open and that work was continuing along all possible lines. It soon became clear that the investigation team could not progress beyond objective technical analysis. By this time, much of public opinion had shifted to discussing informal and speculative versions of events. As the amount of information from the investigation decreased, the number of alternative hypotheses doubled every day. The spectrum of unofficial versions covered three main axes: personal escape, malicious abduction, and organized conspiracy. Each hypothesis had its supporters, analysts, and entire communities discussing it on social media, scientific forums, and blogs. The most obvious version for discussion was voluntary disappearance. Supporters claimed that Kassen could have felt a threat to his personal safety, or the danger of uncontrolled dissemination of the formula. He had deliberately prepared himself. He had wiped his devices, removed all personal items from his home, and deleted all key data from the internet. This theory quickly gained popularity due to the nature of the professor's work, his well-known tendency to calculate everything, and his habit of leaving nothing to chance. The second version is kidnapping with the aim of seizing the results of scientific work. Journalists flooded the information field with references to numerous cases of industrial and scientific espionage, citing examples of the disappearance of technology specialists abroad. Under this hypothesis, suspicion fell on anonymous structures, competitors from a number of research teams, as well as certain third forces, possibly linked to state interests or transnational partners. The most conspiratorial component was the myth of a conspiracy among the elite to remove Kassen for secret research. Some bloggers claimed that the scientist could have been forcibly taken out of the country to use the formula in classified or defense programs. This version was denied by all official agencies, but it was often referred to by those who tend to look for hidden subtexts and consider the disappearance part of a broader game. Alongside the major hypotheses, there was discussion of possible personal crises, fatigue, professional burnout, or a temporary escape from the world of science to restore inner balance. This view was supported by psychologists who noted that periods of major discoveries are always emotionally critical for innovators. An important point. Despite the variety of scenarios, none of the versions explained all the anomalies. The complete sterility of the apartment, the deleted data, the disappearance of traces of movement. On the contrary, the openness of the field for interpretation only reinforced the aura of mystery surrounding the scientist and raised the temperature of public passions. While the search investigation was underway, laboratory research centers around the world began verifying Kassen's achievements from open sources. International expertise began with a thorough comparison of all his publications, conference reports, informal comments, and interviews. Major neuroscience centers assembled teams of specialists in biochemistry, neuropsychology, and pedagogy to try to reproduce the results described. Some of the experiments showed that certain elements of the formula worked. The subject's consciousness did indeed demonstrate a sharp increase in their ability to assimilate information under certain clearly measurable conditions. However, the effect was very short-lived, and careful monitoring revealed statistically significant fluctuations. A significant part of the success depended not only on the unique combination of stimuli, but also on the personal motivation, skills, and psychophysiological characteristics of the test subjects. Mathematical models developed by outside groups confirmed that not all variables can be clearly formalized in a mass format. Some calculations proved unstable as the sample size increased. The team from the Lausanne lab suggested that Kassen's model might have worked as a set of unique protocols, each of which needed to be finely tuned. Without this, the final effect quickly disappeared. Another object of analysis was the possible long-term consequences and side effects. It turned out that some participants in the experiments experienced bouts of short-term anxiety and memory lapses after extreme stress. The fact was that the very idea of accelerated consciousness growth was more of a dynamic strategy than a universal medical technology. Expert discussion gradually shifted to ethical questions. Is it permissible to mass distribute partially reproducible protocols if some of the observed effects are temporary and ambiguous? At this point, no official center has reached a final conclusion. Nevertheless, Kassen's work has been recognized as a catalyst for the development of new directions in neurotechnology, individual educational trajectories, and the formation of an ideologically open scientific community. The public debate surrounding the formula for accelerated consciousness growth coincided with the peak of the discrepancy between expectations of scientific progress and fears about its ethical implications. The first independent expert assessments identified a direct risk. Radical acceleration of cognitive processes could lead not only to increased productivity, but also to unexpected personality changes. errors in decision-making, and increased dependence on external stimulation. International biomedical and psychological institutions have called for the immediate convening of an ethics committee to specifically address the admissibility of direct work with the fundamental layers of motivation and self-awareness. Among the issues raised were possible violation of personal integrity, loss of stable self-identity, the danger of manipulation for educational or political purposes, and, most importantly, the likelihood of negative consequences for children and adolescents. A number of publications in leading scientific journals noted that even if Kassen's formula is only a theoretical tool, an attempt to massively implement such technology would inevitably lead to a wide range of moral dilemmas. On the one hand, there is the human right to personal development. On the other, there is society's duty to protect citizens from ill-considered or irreversible changes in consciousness. Many educators and leaders of parent movements have openly protested against experiments outside strict protocols, demanding safety guarantees and the creation of independent supervisory boards. Children's rights organizations raised questions about informed consent in a situation where the outcome is not guaranteed, and the expected effects may differ from the actual ones. There has been a shift in public discourse. Whereas previously the question of innovation was the exclusive preserve of scientists, the discussion has now spilled over into articles, debates, and even works of art. Essays by renowned philosophers on the limits of permissible intervention in the nature of the mind have been published, as well as TV series and documentaries that reflect the same concerns to a wider audience. Within the scientific community itself, a review of the criteria for approving experimental work with humans began. The need for new forms of vigilance, multiple interdisciplinary ethical coordination, and rigorous external review at every stage of innovation implementation was discussed. The position of the developers themselves, including Kassen's students and colleagues, did not stop the debate. Many of them insisted that shock therapy in the field of cognitive practices was unacceptable without many years of long-term observation. The emergence of these public concerns largely explained the tension that preceded Pierre Kassen's disappearance. For a significant part of contemporary science and politics, the professor's disappearance was a wake-up call. There is a great temptation to resolve complex moral issues on the fly, without critical self-assessment or concern for delayed consequences. The information space in which the Pierre Kassen story unfolded was not initially prepared for reflection on such controversial and complex material. The first publications in the press were sensationalist in nature. Headlines promised to reveal the secret of the century, exaggerated the significance of the allegedly discovered formula, and glossed over details that did not fit into the exciting narrative. Within days, television, blogs, and podcasts became a platform for heated debate. Experts divided into camps of skeptics and enthusiasts. Journalists invited Kassen's relatives and colleagues to the studio, and users shared personal stories, often with little connection to the actual course of the investigation. In the absence of verified information, rumors, speculation, anonymous testimonies, and assumptions proliferated. At the same time, a whole movement of activists emerged, demanding scientific transparency and maximum publicity in the coverage of not only the official versions, but also all alternative interpretations. Social media became a breeding ground for memes, parodies, speculation about secret meetings, and mystical phenomena allegedly linked to Kassen. This wave of information noise hampered the investigation and at times undermined trust in any official statements. In their search for sensational stories, magazine editors and TV channels often featured self-proclaimed experts, picked up false versions of events, manipulated facts, or simply got the details wrong. The appearance of the first exposés analyzing the fakes did not immediately restore balance. The desire for views, ratings, and audience engagement prevailed over thorough journalism. Nevertheless, it was the diversity of public debate that highlighted several truly important perspectives: the role of science as a social institution, the risks and benefits of independent expertise, and the limits of individual research. In the long term, the broad discussion strengthened institutional control mechanisms and introduced a trend toward public reporting and ethical monitoring of all major projects. Public memory of the Kassen affair remains polarized. Some media outlets remember him as a victim of information overload and speculation, while others, on the contrary, revere him as a symbol of a new era of scientific responsibility in the age of digital communication and instant news dissemination. Pierre Kassen's disappearance quickly ceased to be a local French investigation. Thanks to his professional connections and scientific authority, the news spread instantly throughout research circles in Europe, North America, and Asia, triggering a wave of comments and specialized publications. Many foreign colleagues recalled joint conferences, projects under the auspices of major scientific foundations, and, most importantly, Kassen's repeated calls for the open exchange of experimental data between laboratories. Within a week of the announcement, the disappearance was on the agenda of leading academic and intergovernmental organizations. Some scientists publicly expressed concern about the transparency of the investigation, not ruling out the possibility of politicization, pressure on individual participants, and attempts to censor the new wave of discoveries in the field of cognitive technology. With the start of journalistic investigations, articles and commentaries appeared in leading intellectual publications in Britain, the United States, Germany, Spain, and Japan. They spoke of the threat of technology leaks, the potential risks of scientific espionage, and the need for a careful balance in the publication of Kassen's materials. Several large international associations appealed to the French Ministry of Education to ensure access to the archives and to prevent attempts to privatize the collective results of scientific research. It is also important to note that the active members of the international professional community have launched initiatives to create an independent monitoring center to record all cases of the disappearance of prominent researchers. A study of similar incidents in the past has shown that, contrary to popular belief, most such disappearances are not linked to criminal intent, but to organizational failures, bureaucratic delays, and a lack of willingness to protect intellectual property. Major universities where Kassen used to lecture have declared their solidarity with their French colleagues and set up temporary monitoring committees made up of security and legal experts. Some research institutes have offered rewards for any information that could shed light on the last days of the scientist's life. At the same time, a number of Western and Asian media outlets attempted to politicize the incident, portraying the disappearance as part of a Cold War between research teams competing for primacy in the development of new methods of consciousness expansion. These publications formed the basis for new guidelines on the exchange of laboratory results. Most centers switched to closed protocols and tightened internal control over publications, which reduced the openness of previous cooperation. The public outside France also split into skeptics and enthusiasts. Some demanded that the data on Kassen's experiments be made available to the whole world, while others feared the uncontrolled introduction of the formula into schools and medical institutions. The debate became highly controversial. Every new step taken by the police, every statement made by the scientific community, and every leak of information became a reason for new heated discussions. Overall, the international resonance of Pierre Kassen's case cemented his name among the most mysterious disappearances in the history of modern science, while also drawing attention to issues of ethics, transparency, and global security in scientific innovation. The first weeks after Pierre Kassen's disappearance were a time of intense work to reconstruct every detail of his last journey. Working groups were formed from university staff, research colleagues, and digital forensics experts. The focus was on reconstructing the exact chronology. Even conflicting witness statements were interviewed, digital traces in video surveillance systems were analyzed, and special experiments were planned to verify each hypothesis. Expert teams pieced together dozens of video frames from streets near the campus, archives of email and messenger logs, and geolocation data from work devices. That's when they found some weird stuff. Some recordings were missing from the server, and some data appeared retroactively, like it was artificially uploaded to the devices after Kassen stopped using them. A complete analysis of the movements of all employees on the critical days was carried out in the laboratory. However, despite the thoroughness of the investigation, it was not possible to confirm the presence of outsiders on campus, or to prove that the professor had deliberately isolated himself. The fragments of manuscripts left in the apartment were re-examined by international forensic experts. Assumptions about encryption, secret codes, or optimized evidence schedules were not confirmed. At the same time, a separate team examined Kassen's correspondence with scientific and professional associations, his communications via internal mail services, visual and audio materials from past video and teleconferences, and even fragments of speeches from the archives of foreign universities were compared. In some letters and chats, experts picked up subtle hints of personal fears, uncertainty about the stability of colleagues, and pressure from certain structures, all of which created an atmosphere of shadow in which the professor had been working in recent months. Of particular interest was information about possible similar disappearances in the history of modern cognitive science. 3 cases were found of leading researchers temporarily disappearing in very similar circumstances: leaving without a trace, deletion of data, absence of witnesses, and subsequent recovery of only part of the information. The common feature was the absence of a single dominant version of events. As a result of the reconstruction, it became clear that the chain of events did not have a linear logic. There were too many gaps, contradictions, and inconsistencies. The Commission's final report was pessimistic. Regardless of the efforts invested, no theory could unequivocally explain all the details of the Kassen case, and each new attempt at disclosure only expanded the zone of uncertainty surrounding the researcher's disappearance. Several years have passed since Pierre Kassen's disappearance, but his name still retains a distinctly audible aura of mystery. The official investigation was formally closed 2 years later, with the status of unsolved case and a reservation that it would be reopened if new information came to light. Nevertheless, reports of new clues allegedly found continue to surface periodically. An entry in an online journal, a comment in a scientific discussion indirectly attributed to Kassen, or unidentified fragments of texts mentioning unknown protocols. Many laboratories continue to sift through Kassen's old publications and conduct experiments based on available protocols, incomplete archives, and surviving drafts. Several leading young researchers have put forward their own hypotheses, ranging from the fragmentary effect to the search for digital footprints on the internet. But no new discoveries worthy of being considered fundamental have been officially recognized. Some of the projects that got started during Kassen's lifetime, experimental platforms for accelerated learning, international educational competitions, and mutual aid groups for young scientists, have been reformatted into foundations named after him. These organizations manage to maintain a high level of interest in the topic of ethics in neurobiology, which is reflected in the growing number of publications and interdisciplinary educational programs. At annual symposiums in memory of the professor, debates are held on the nature of the missing formula. Does it exist as a complete system? Is it possible in principle to reliably reproduce the effect of accelerated consciousness growth? Or has science simply opened up a new avenue of inquiry? An opinion is increasingly heard at the forum that the main value of Kassen's legacy lies not so much in the formula as in the example of thoughtful, meticulous, and responsible scientific research, careful attention to every nuance of the team, and the memory of the very risk of knowledge. Periodically, statements appear in the press about alleged sensational developments in the case. Photos of the scientist are allegedly found in other countries. Fragments of letters or diaries are published. However, after investigation, most of these reports turn out to be either manipulative or taken out of context, which only confirms the general aura of mystery surrounding the last stage of Kassen's life. One way or another, the Kassen case has taken its place in the history of modern science as an unsolved mystery and, at the same time, a point of growth for a whole generation of researchers, scientists, and everyone who believes in the power of honest search for truth. Pierre Kassen's legacy goes beyond a single formula or mysterious disappearance. His contribution is a new standard of scientific ethics, an example of unwavering dedication to his work, and a symbol of how personal integrity can change academic and research communities for decades to come. The laboratories that grew out of his team still adhere to maximum transparency in publications, open peer review, and interdisciplinary expert groups. The study of Kassen's work has become part of the required curriculum for graduate students in many countries. The case study helps future scientists reflect on the balance between the pursuit of breakthroughs and responsibility to society. This fosters critical analysis of new approaches, moral dilemmas, self-reflection, and resistance to reputational pressures. The experience of investigating the disappearance is a free lesson in attention to detail and perception of the limits of what is acceptable in professional research. Modern protocols for working with personal data, the introduction of digital security principles, and periodic audits of laboratory processes are all, to one degree or another, the result of lessons learned from the Kassen case. For the younger generation of researchers, the figure of the professor is a symbol of the need to not be afraid of difficult questions, to not give in to the temptation of quick solutions and recognition, and to be prepared for long-term efforts with no clear guarantee of immediate success. His personal notes and drafts, available in the digital archive of one of the world's leading libraries, serve not only as material for biographical research, but also as a source of inspiration for those who are ready to walk the fine line between discovery and moral responsibility. The Kassen case led to the creation of international awards in the field of science ethics, special grant programs, and mutual aid platforms for researchers in difficult personal and professional situations. Lectures dedicated to his legacy attract hundreds of listeners and bring society back to eternal questions. Where is the line between genius and risk, between intellectual honesty and the thirst for recognition? The memory of Pierre Kassen is a reminder that true science is impossible without constant exploration, critical thinking, respect for collective knowledge, and fidelity to the principles of humanism, even in the most turbulent times.